This conflict didn't originate with me. My action was simply erecting a boundary. Yet when the association's so-called security detail attempted to dismantle my fencing and claim my territory, I responded with 8,000 volts of legitimate Texan power. They anticipated legal battles, but in the end, they were the ones pleading for leniency. Through long experience, I've learned a fundamental truth. Serenity is fleeting, especially in these parts, on ground that holds memories far deeper than any person. I am Clay Banner, and this expanse of sun-scorched Texas earth, every rock, every cedar stub, every post setting, has borne the legacy of my lineage since 1931. My grandfather etched the initial property line with a borrowed mule and hands still trembling from the Great Depression. My father kept this homestead viable through arid spells, livestock epidemics, and a tempest that tore away half the barn's roof, yet miraculously left the antique windmill still turning as if undisturbed. Now it falls to me. 120 acres, just enough room to draw a full breath and serene enough to hear one's own thoughts. My mornings typically commence before the sun crests the eastern rise. At that hour, the air retains a cool crispness, carrying scents of cedar, dry earth, and the remnants of the coyote's nocturnal foraging. My boots find their familiar indentations in the well-trodden porch planks, and my loyal companion, Duke, ambles alongside, stretching with a yawn as if we're already pressed for time. By 6 o'clock, I'm assessing the livestock, tapping each water basin to gauge the overnight depletion. Following that, it's a methodical inspection of the perimeter fence, section by section, precisely as my father instructed. It's not out of expectation of trouble, but rather the understanding that trouble finds those who cease their vigilance more readily. For the greater part of my existence, this regimen sufficed to maintain a comfortable distance from the outside world. The local populace recognized me, the sheriff knew my name, and genuine neighbors offered respect to a man who tended his land and kept to himself. However, the world evolved, or perhaps it simply migrated northward, pressing against my very boundary. The Clear Hilliker's development materialized beyond my northern limit, an overnight eruption akin to a skin affliction. Streets carved with unnatural straightness, lawns meticulously manicured, and residences arranged in faultless rows that defied the land's natural contours. They blazed a thoroughfare where cattle once roamed freely. They planted flora ill-suited to the Texan inferno, and populated these new dwellings with individuals who relished the concept of rural living without embracing its inherent realities. Initially, I paid it no mind. Let them irrigate their manicured lawns and enact regulations concerning mailbox aesthetics and acceptable bird feeders. None of it pertained to me. My property title predated the very conception of homeowner associations. My land was officially recorded long before such entities became a fleeting thought in a developer's mind. Nevertheless, a subtle tension arose within me as I observed the road's proximity to my fence line. It wasn't born of apprehension or vexation, but rather an ingrained rancher's intuition, that prickle of awareness preceding an unseen storm. Consequently, I resolved to reinforce the northern fence, not to antagonize, nor to posture, but to establish an unequivocal, robust demarcation between a realm of manicured hedges and a domain governed by the sun, the soil, and sheer exertion. I personally set every post, treating cedar with steel reinforcement, straightening them like the barrels of firearms. The wire was strung taut, humming audibly with the shifting breeze. Solar-powered cameras were affixed at 50-foot intervals, and signs were posted every 10 feet. Private property, no trespassing, video surveillance. Should a person fail to comprehend such direct communication, the issue lies not with the signage. Upon completion, I stepped back, wiping dust from my hands. The sun was descending, imbuing the entire fence line with a coppery hue that stretched towards the horizon. A sense of quiet satisfaction settled within me. But tranquility is delicate, and some individuals resent boundaries they did not establish. It began subtly. A dismissive glance from a passing runner, an SUV decelerating to observe for an uncharacteristic duration, a group of youths gesturing at my cameras as if they were theatrical props. I disregarded these intrusions, remaining focused on my land, my livestock, and what was rightfully mine. Then, one morning, I discovered an envelope in my mailbox, so exquisitely finished it seemed averse to any contact with dirt. An embossed seal adorned it, addressed not to Clay, but to property owner, Northern Boundary Zone. No return address was present, merely a name printed at the bottom, Bradley Sloan, President, Clear Hillikers Homeowners Association. I knew him not, desired no acquaintance, and felt no need for it. I stood on my porch, the letter in my hand, the wind tugging at its corner as if bearing a message, and for the first time I felt the storm I had sensed weeks prior beginning to coalesce. Distant, silent, yet undeniably present. I opened the envelope, read the initial sentence, and a profound, incredulous laugh escaped me. For whatever conflict they envisioned initiating, they possessed no comprehension of the adversary they had chosen. I recall standing there on the porch, the letter unfolded in my hands, Duke resting his head by my boots as if awaiting a verdict. The morning sun had yet to burn through the prevailing haze, yet my day was already taking a downward trajectory. The communication was couched in language meticulously crafted to appear official, the kind of polished phrasing employed when one intends to assert dominance without overtly assuming an authoritarian tone. It stated that my recently erected fence was non-compliant with the established aesthetic guidelines of the Clear Hill Acres community. It further stipulated that I was required to remove unauthorized visual obstructions within 30 to 40 days to preserve neighborhood harmony. Neighborhood harmony. The very phrase elicited a scoff. My property could be characterized in numerous ways. Rugged, arid, sun-baked, obstinate, but harmonious was certainly not among them, and it was certainly never a component of their neighborhood. I finished my coffee, folded the correspondence, placed it on the kitchen table, and proceeded with my day as if it were mere junk mail, which in my estimation it was. A clerical error. Someone had inadvertently checked the wrong box on their clipboard and dispatched the incorrect correspondence to the wrong individual. Yet 2 weeks later, a second envelope arrived. This one lacked any pretense of politeness. It was a larger envelope, fashioned from heavier stock, bearing the identical glossy HOA emblem stamped on the front, as if an attempt were made to lend it the appearance of an official government document. I brought it inside, took a seat at the table, and used a pocket knife to carefully sever the flap. Duke ambled over, resting his head on my knee, as if sensing impending trouble before I had even completed the perusal of its contents. Within lay a formal notice of ongoing non-compliance, a substantial packet of printed pages comprised of paragraphs that sounded as though their author had ingested a legal lexicon. It declared that my failure to respond constituted a breach of regulations. It asserted that I was creating a public safety hazard. It informed me that the HOA was prepared to escalate the matter. Tucked into the rear of the packet was a small, blurred satellite depiction of my property, with a thick red outline encircling the northern perimeter, as if it rightfully belonged to them. This particular detail failed to amuse me. I gazed at the red demarcation, then out the window towards the distant ridge, and a slow warmth crept up the back of my neck. Not anger, not yet. Merely that familiar rancher's intuition, the internal alarm that signals when something is fundamentally amiss. Consequently, I composed a reply. Not on ostentatious stationery, nor on printer paper, but on a sheet torn from a lined notebook, the kind used by children in middle school. I wrote in all capital letters, partly to provoke them, and partly because it felt appropriate. I informed them that my land was not, and never had been, part of Clear Hill Acres, nor would it ever be. I attached photocopies of my deed, my parcel registration, and the historical boundary map, which had been on file for a duration exceeding the combined lifespans of every individual within that HOA's leadership. I then affixed my signature at the bottom, Clay Banner, owner, independent as hell. God bless Texas. I folded it, placed it in a plain white envelope, and dispatched it. For a period of roughly 2 weeks, a semblance of quiet returned. The kind of silence that fosters the hope that common sense might have, just possibly, prevailed. However, genuine adversity does not announce its arrival. It does not issue advance warnings or leave voicemail messages. Sometimes it scales your fence in broad daylight, armed with bolt cutters, and occasionally it appears adorned in a polo shirt bearing a counterfeit security insignia, but I was unaware of that specific detail at the time, for then, sitting at my kitchen table with the second missive folded beside my plate, I believed the storm was receding. As it transpired, it was merely gathering its formidable strength. It was a Thursday afternoon when the initial motion alert vibrated on my mobile device. I recall the moment vividly as I was submerged to my knees in mud, attempting to repair a recalcitrant water valve that had been exhibiting a persistent leak since spring. Duke emitted a single sharp, low bark and directed his gaze northward. I removed my gloves, activated the phone, and the camera feed materialized. Two individuals were positioned precisely at my fence line, clad in HOA polo shirts and tucked into khaki trousers, as if they were en route to an interview at a landscaping firm. One was tall and gaunt, the sort of man who appeared likely to be swept away by a Texan windstorm. The other, of a heavier build and flushed complexion, possessed the stature of someone who had spent more time vociferating than laboring. Both held clipboards. The mere presence of these clipboards communicated volumes to me. There exists a particular breed of man who wields a clipboard as a symbol of authority, as if its possession bestows upon him an unearned power. The slender individual was capturing images through the fence slats, the rapid clicks sounding as if my barrier were a crime scene. The more robust man traced his hand along the uppermost rail as if he held ownership of it. Then I witnessed the precise instant when everything shifted. The larger man planted one boot on the lower beam, grasped the top of the fence, and commenced to ascend. He paid no heed to the sign directly before his eyes. He evinced no concern for stepping onto private ranch property. He didn't even consider the courtesy of knocking. He simply climbed, his movements slow and deliberate, akin to a raccoon adorned with a badge. I neither shouted, nor rushed out to confront them, nor uttered a word. I simply observed. For one vital lesson my grandfather imparted, and imparted with significant emphasis, was this: never engage a fool before you have secured your evidence. Consequently, I saved the video recording, meticulously tagged the file, and relocated it to a password-protected folder bearing a designation only I would ever decipher. Approximately 10 minutes later, the two men descended, scribbled notes on their clipboards, and departed towards the development road with an air of complete nonchalance. One might surmise that this would have marked the conclusion of the matter. However, a few days subsequently, I discovered the initial tangible indication that this was not merely an instance of an overzealous HOA conducting a cursory inspection. I was traversing the fence line following a gale, walking at a leisurely pace, ensuring no sections had been dislodged, when my attention was drawn to something amiss. The uppermost wire had been severed cleanly, not frayed, not broken by the elements, but cut. The incision was smooth, positioned high, and executed with bolt cutters. It was impossible to overlook. Someone had leaned in beneath the no trespassing sign and snipped it as if pruning a weed. I remained there for a considerable duration, my thumb hooked in my belt loop, my gaze fixed upon the orange-marked post where my boundary markers are affixed. My land rarely offers overt signals, but when it does, one must pay close attention. I reaccessed the camera footage, scrolled back through the timeline, and there he was. The same individual, the same HOA polo, navigating the fence line like a purposeful opossum, casting furtive glances around, crouching, cutting. That was the decisive moment. To laugh at a letter is one thing. To witness a grown man illegally enter your property armed with bolt cutters is an entirely different proposition. Therefore, that evening, after tending to the steers, I filed my initial police report. Officer Judson arrived at my driveway approximately 20 minutes later. His cruiser produced that familiar crunching sound on the gravel, a sound I've heard since childhood. Judson is a competent individual. He once assisted me in rounding up stray cattle, seeking no remuneration in return. He exited his vehicle, stretched his back, and leaned against the hood. "All right, Clay," he stated. "Let's see what we've got." I presented him with the printed images. He emitted a low, prolonged whistle. "This constitutes criminal trespass," he declared. "And that, right there," he indicated the severed wire, is property damage." I nodded. "I surmised you would concur." Judson adjusted his hat and gazed northward towards the nascent residences appearing on the ridge. "These HOA individuals," he muttered. "They seem to forget where the paved road concludes." He was not mistaken, and as I stood there beneath the lingering twilight, surveying the land my family had possessed since 1931, a quiet sense of resolve settled within my chest. Not fury, not apprehension, but a firm determination. For I now understood something previously unknown to me. This was not a mere misunderstanding. This was a test, and they were about to discover they had selected the wrong fence to tamper with. The kind of night where the air hangs heavy and still, the cicadas fall silent, and the moon appears as if a sliver has been shaved from its edge. I had just concluded securing the barn when the first motion detection alert pinged on my mobile device. 12:47 a.m. Duke's ears twitched before I even accessed the screen. Camera 6, northern perimeter, infrared mode. A solitary figure traversed the boundary, moving with a slow, crouched, deliberate gait, hood obscuring their features, a backpack cinched tightly, each step measured, as if they had traversed this fence before. And in their hand, even through the grainy night vision, I recognized the distinct shape. Bolt cutters. I froze the feed, zoomed in, my jaw tightening. The same build, the same footwear, the same characteristic stride as the HOA patrol operative from the daylight intrusion. Except tonight, they fancied themselves cunning. A hoodie instead of a polo, a scarf instead of a badge. But foolish individuals do not attain greater intelligence after midnight. They merely become more audacious. I resumed playback, observed them, reach upwards, align the cutters, and apply pressure. Snap. A clean severance. But the crucial element they overlooked, the very thing for which I had been anticipating, was that I'd replaced that specific section 2 days prior with a dummy wire connected to a compact die pack. Not harmful, not dangerous, merely messy. And precisely as they leaned through the newly created gap, a sharp, distinct burst of pressure erupted. The camera captured the visual perfectly, a vibrant, almost comical explosion of neon orange dye splattering across their sweatshirt, face, and backpack, as if a paint factory had experienced an unexpected sneeze. They stumbled backward, flailing their arms, slipping on the loose dirt, and exclaiming curses loud enough for the microphone to capture a portion of their profanity, implying the rest. Then they fled with haste like a man who suddenly realized he was on the precipice of a profoundly unpleasant morning. I saved the footage, filed it, and extracted still frames. I even retained the audio recording where they shrieked, "Hell, he tricked us!" That particular soundbite I intend to utilize. I was still organizing the files when headlights swept across my porch. The familiar rumble of a truck engine ceased. Not Judson. Sheriff Hayes, a substantial man with gentle eyes and boots older than a significant portion of the county's population, pulled to a halt. He disembarked slowly, hat held beneath his arm. "Clay," he stated, his voice low. "We received a report of a suspicious individual observed running through Clear Hill Acres. Orange as a jack-o'-lantern. Figured I'd check on you first." I simply handed him the tablet. He watched the recorded clip without uttering a word. He didn't blink. He didn't display any haste. When the die pack detonated and the individual fell backward, Hayes expelled a prolonged exhalation through his nose, the kind a man makes when presented with a situation that is equal parts absurd and entirely predictable. "Well," he finally remarked, "that's certainly criminal trespass. No doubt about it. Possibly attempted vandalism as well." I nodded. "I imagined you'd reach that conclusion." He ambled over to the fence and illuminated the warning signs I had strategically placed every 10 feet with his flashlight. "Electric?" he inquired. "Not yet," I replied, "but it is legally permissible when I choose to install it. Agricultural use, certified under Section 117. Hayes offered a smile, not a friendly one, but a knowing one. "I will make a note of that in my report," he stated. It will clearly indicate that you are acting within your legal rights. These HOA fellows, they seem to forget that Countryland does not operate according to their little rule books." He tipped his hat, gazing north towards the development. "Clay, this won't be the last time they attempt something." "They did not achieve their objective tonight." I folded my arms. "And what precisely do you believe they were seeking?" Hayes met my gaze with a long, steady look. "Not your fence," he stated. "Your land." He returned to his truck, rolling down the window before driving away. "You call me if they return. And Clay, be prepared." As his taillights receded down the road, the night assumed a different character, as if a line had been irrevocably crossed, not by my hand, but by theirs. And from that precise moment onward, this was no longer a disagreement. It had transformed into a conflict. The morning subsequent to the dye incident, the sky remained a somber gray when Duke began to bark. It was not his typical alert for a stranger on the road, nor was it the sound he made for coyotes. This was the sharp, concise warning bark he reserved exclusively for situations that felt fundamentally amiss. I stepped onto the porch, coffee mug in hand, and that's when I perceived it. A black SUV was proceeding slowly down my driveway. Not the sheriff's vehicle, not a neighbor's conveyance. It was too immaculate, too polished, too incongruous on the gravel track. The SUV halted, and from it emerged a man who appeared to iron his posture every single morning. Pressed slacks, leather footwear, his hair meticulously combed with an almost mathematical precision. He carried a leather folio, the kind favored by urban professionals who wished to project an aura of importance. He surveyed my ranch as if assessing it for an impending sale. Then he offered a forced smile. "Mr. Banner," he said, extending a hand that I made no move to accept. Bradley Sloan, president of So, the individual, finally presented himself. He was not imposing in stature, nor did he exude physical strength, yet he radiated a particular brand of self-assurance, one forged through paperwork and signatures rather than the earth and honest labor. "What can I do for you?" I inquired. He removed his sunglasses, and that smile diminished considerably. "Well, let us just say, last night's events have caused a degree of concern." I raised an eyebrow. "You refer to the trespass?" He gestured dismissively, as if swatting away an insect. "A misunderstanding." That simple dismissal revealed everything I needed to know. He had not come to discuss the illegal entry. He had come because someone had returned home stained orange and in tears. "In any event," he continued, "I am here to propose a mutually beneficial arrangement." Mutually beneficial. That phrase should undoubtedly be accompanied by a prominent red flag. I maintained a neutral expression, but internally I was already reaching for the small digital recorder concealed within my shirt pocket. An old habit, cultivated during my military service, a lesson learned from a trusted comrade. Never enter negotiations without tangible evidence of the discourse. I activated the recorder with my thumb. "Proceed," I instructed. Bradley cleared his throat, clasped his hands together as if he had rehearsed this gesture before a mirror. "Look, Clay, may I call you Clay?" "No." "Right, Mr. Banner. The residents of Clear Hill Acres, well, they were not anticipating a substantial wooden fence positioned directly adjacent to their property line." "Not their property line," I corrected him. "It is mine." He chuckled politely, disregarding my interjection. "So, here is my proposal. What if, just humor me for a moment, we relieve you of this burden, this northern strip, perhaps 30 to 40 feet of it? We would be willing to purchase it at a very equitable price. This would reduce your maintenance obligations, and it would provide us with additional space to enhance the neighborhood buffer." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "How much?" I inquired, maintaining a flat tone. He brightened considerably, akin to a salesperson on the verge of closing a significant deal. "We could offer a direct cash buyout of $50,000. It would be a swift, clean transaction with tax advantages." I nodded deliberately. "And what transpires if I decline?" His eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly, just enough to betray the veneer of his composure. "Well then, The association might be compelled to continue filing safety claims, fence violations, environmental concerns. You understand how these matters can become protracted. There it was, the unspoken threat, articulated just clearly enough to be captured by the recorder. I met his gaze directly. "Are you attempting to intimidate me, Bradley?" He forced a laugh. "Oh, no, nothing of the sort. Merely offering solutions. You see, when circumstances become challenging, it is sometimes more prudent to resolve matters amicably, privately. There is no necessity for legal counsel, no need for escalation." I allowed the silence to extend, making it long and heavy. Then I stepped closer, moving just one boot length towards him. "You have encroached upon my property, attempted to purchase that which is not for sale, and sought to coerce me with fabricated safety complaints." He swallowed audibly. I would not characterize it in such a manner. "I would," I countered. He cleared his throat once more, his practiced posture suddenly faltering. "Well, the offer remains open. However, I sincerely hope you will consider collaborating with us. It would be most unfortunate if a simple fence were to precipitate ongoing complications." I offered him a slow, deliberate smile, the kind my grandfather taught me, the kind that conveys no warmth whatsoever. "Clay," I stated calmly, "you ought to head back to wherever you came from." He gave a little blink. "Is that a refusal?" "That's an eviction notice. Get off my property." His jaw hardened. He slid his sunglasses back on, marched rigidly to his SUV, and drove away without another word. I remained there until the dust settled. Then I retrieved the audio recorder from my pocket, stopped the capture, and tucked it away inside my jacket. That recording would prove vital, far more than he could ever imagine. And for the very first time, I understood this wasn't about property lines, or the visual appeal of the neighborhood, or even the homeowners association rules. This was about my land. And Bradley Sloan had just declared war. I barely slept that night, not from apprehension. Fear had vanished from my life the same year I served overseas with the military. Instead, it was anger, the slow, persistent kind that lodges itself deep within your chest and waits. By dawn, I knew precisely what action was required. You see, when someone attempts to redefine your boundaries, to redraw your property lines as if they were a child with a red marker, you don't engage them in debate. You seek out those who maintain the authentic records. So I tended to the cattle, gathered my essential documents, whistled for Duke to hop into the truck bed, and set off for town. The county administrative building stands at the intersection of a dusty lot, just behind the Postal Service office. It's occupied the same location since the 1950s. Its brick exterior, weathered by the sun, its gutters sagging, and the flag flapping lazily in the morning breeze. Inside, behind the reception desk, sat Roberta, the same Roberta who has worked there since my childhood, the same woman whose grandfather shod my grandfather's horses. A true Texan, possessing an intimate knowledge of the county that no GPS could ever replicate. She looked up from her work, offering a smile without rising. "Well now, if it isn't Clay Banner. Is trouble finding you, or are you out looking for it?" I placed the pile of HOA correspondence on the counter. "A bit of both," I replied. She adjusted her spectacles, skimmed through the envelopes, and then nodded as if she had anticipated the outcome. "I've been hearing about those Clear Hill residents. They're quite enthusiastic." "That's one way to put it," I murmured. "All right," she said, pushing her chair back and swiveling towards the aging computer. "Let's pull up your parcel." Click, click. A prolonged beep emanated from the antiquated scanner. Then the extensive county map materialized on the screen. Patches of green, tan, and white, all delineated by slender black lines resembling a patchwork quilt. Roberta indicated a corner with her pencil. "Here is your property precisely as it has been recorded since 1931, and the HOA." She zoomed out, scrolled northward, and then pointed to a faint dotted outline. "Here, Clear Hill Acres terminates right at this demarcation. That appears to be a considerable distance south of my fence line." 43 feet, she confirmed. 43 feet of land they will never be permitted to encroach upon unless you willingly surrender it." A sense of release, not exactly relief, but a confirmation of my existing knowledge, washed over me. Roberta turned to me, her eyebrows raised. "Would you like a printout?" "2 copies," I requested. "One for my records, and one for someone who needs to study it carefully." "Oh dear," she chuckled. "I'll have it laminated for you." 5 minutes later, she presented me with 2 immaculately laminated parcel maps. Crystal clear, officially stamped, certified, and irrefutable. "Clay," she said, her voice softening as I carefully folded them. "These HOA individuals don't grasp the essence of land. Their expertise lies in documentation. And this," she tapped the map, "is the documentation that resolves disputes." I expressed my gratitude, loaded Duke back into the truck, and drove directly home. Before midday, I dispatched one of the laminated copies to Bradley Sloan's office. No elaborate letter, no accompanying message, just a vibrant orange sticky note affixed to the front. "Cease trespassing. You are exceeding your authority." I returned to the house, poured myself a mug of coffee, and stood on the porch, observing the dust swirling across the pasture. That was the pivotal moment of change. Until then, I had been reacting. But with that map in my possession, with official county certification that carried more weight than any HOA covenant, I felt grounded once more. They had attempted to challenge me with fabricated authority. Now I possessed the genuine article, and when individuals like Bradley lose a legal confrontation, they don't back down, they escalate. I understood the conflict was far from over. However, I now had a significant advantage. With the laminated map on its way and the county officially endorsing my position, I was certain of one thing. The phase of legal wrangling was concluded. The subsequent chapter would not be penned with ink. So that afternoon, I hitched up the trailer, loaded Duke into the truck bed, and journeyed into town to procure every necessary certified component for a legitimate Texas agricultural electric fence. Old Walt at the counter peered at my collection of insulators, grounding rods, a solar energizer, and a stack of bright yellow warning signs as tall as a hay bale. "Going electric now, Clay." "It appears I have neighbors who don't comprehend barbed wire and polite signage." He nodded without further inquiry. Experienced ranchers understand the wisdom of discretion. Back on my land, I walked the northern perimeter deliberately. The air was warm. The wind carried the subtle scent of cedar, a fragrance that invariably transports me to my grandfather's workshop. Old tools, old wisdom, still relevant. I reinforced the existing posts, checked the wire tension, drove the grounding rods deep into the earth, and mounted the solar energizer on the post I had installed months prior for this precise purpose. Then came the wire, high tensile steel, stretched taut until it emitted a faint metallic hum in the breeze, a sound familiar to ranchers, a sound that conveys, "This fence is serious." I tested the voltage. Perfect. Sufficient to deliver a clear, memorable warning, not excessive enough to harm anyone, not actively attempting to disregard the safety measures. By dusk, I had affixed the final warning sign. "Electric fence, agricultural use, do not touch," spaced every 10 feet, rendered in reflective paint. No excuses. When I activated the energizer, a low hum traversed the entire fence line like an unseen echo. Duke tilted his head in response, then settled down in the grass. A seal of approval, ranch dog style. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of stability, not completion, not safety, but firmly anchored. And precisely as anticipated, trouble arrived. The following morning, while attending to a minor irrigation repair, my tablet alerted me to a motion detection. Camera 2, northwest sector. I wiped my hands, tapped the screen, and there they were. The same 2 HOA security guards from the trespass incident weeks prior, clad in identical sky blue polo shirts, sporting matching sunglasses, despite the sun not yet having fully risen, and exuding an equally matching overconfidence. They sauntered towards my fence like low-budget security operatives. The slender one peered intently through a knot in the wood, as if expecting to witness me concealing treasure in the pasture. The heavier one placed his full palm on the top rail, and then, zap! A sharp, resonant crack split the morning stillness. The man's body convulsed as if he had just embraced a nest of angry hornets. His hat flew off. His clipboard followed suit. He emitted a sound no grown man should ever produce in public. Something akin to a yelp and a high-pitched whistle. His companion froze rigid, eyes wide, mouth agape. He then dropped his phone in the dirt and scrambled backward as if he had just discovered that a hot stove is, in fact, hot, despite all the warnings. I replayed the event twice, not out of vindictiveness, but as irrefutable proof. Proof of their unauthorized entry. Proof that the fence functioned as intended. Proof that they had not given up their pursuit and that I had no intention of yielding. I saved the clip, made redundant copies on 3 separate drives, and printed still images as a precaution. As the electric hum resonated along the fence line, Duke sat beside me, his tail flicking, an almost amused expression on his face. "He won't be the last one, boy," I remarked. Duke snorted as if he already understood. "Because the reality about bullies in HOA attire is this. They don't concede when they're in the wrong. They double down." So I stood there at the edge of my property, arms crossed, the sun cresting the cedar ridge, and I felt the next phase approaching like a dust storm on a summer highway. They would arrive with complaints. They would arrive in anger, and they would bring reinforcements. What I did not anticipate, however, was that the following morning, when they appeared, they would not be alone. A news crew would accompany them, and that was the day everything became public knowledge. The advantage of residing in this rural setting is the ability to perceive impending trouble long before it reaches your doorstep. The subsequent morning, I detected it before Duke even stirred. Gravel crunching under tires, moving with excessive speed, an indication of palpable anger. I stepped onto the porch, my coffee mug still warm in my hand, and indeed, a gleaming black SUV navigated my driveway as if it held ownership. Bradley, clad in pressed khaki trousers and polished loafers entirely unsuited for the terrain, emerged. A smile that failed to reach his eyes accompanied him. He held a manila folder as if it were a badge of authority. He barely glanced at the landscape, the expansive pasture, the gentle breeze, the distant horizon. Individuals of his ilk never do. They are too preoccupied with coveting what they desire to possess. He strode directly towards my porch. "Mr. Banner," he called out, adjusting his sunglasses, "we need to discuss an urgent violation." I took a slow sip of my coffee. No haste, no faltering. "Good morning to you as well, Bradley." He feigned ignorance. HOA representatives excel at selective hearing. I have received reports, he tapped the folder, that you have erected an unauthorized electrified barrier along a boundary shared with the community. This contravention violates safety regulations, public access expectations, and Section 4A of the Ridgeview Community Guidelines pertaining to shared aesthetics. I let out a scoff. "This is my land, Bradley, not your community, and that fence is entirely legal. Sheriff Hayes himself approved it." Bradley removed his sunglasses, as if this gesture alone was meant to intimidate me. "Clay, listen to me very carefully. I'm offering you an opportunity to avoid a significant penalty and potential escalation to civil litigation. Remove the fence immediately." I placed my coffee cup on the railing, the slightest tap against the wood. "And if I choose not to?" I inquired. Bradley straightened his posture. "Then the board will initiate formal proceedings. And believe me, there will be repercussions." I offered a smile. Not a broad one, just enough to make him uneasy. "You already dispatched 2 of your security personnel to dismantle it," I stated. "One of them yelped like a pig when the wire made contact. You should perhaps instruct them on the importance of reading warning signs." Bradley's face twitched imperceptibly. He clearly hadn't anticipated my awareness, and he most certainly hadn't expected me to possess evidence. He opened his mouth to retort when a sound reached both of us simultaneously. Tires on gravel, rapid and purposeful, not angry, but driven. A white van rounded the bend, skidded to a halt, and 2 individuals emerged, armed with cameras, microphones, and that palpable excitement unique to news crews when they sense a compelling story. Channel 5. Action News. Bradley's worst nightmare. The reporter, a woman in her 40s with a confident stride, approached, her microphone extended. "Mr. Banner, we received an anonymous tip regarding the HOA's attempt to remove legally installed agricultural fencing on private property. Are you willing to comment?" Bradley spun towards her, visible panic spreading across his face like a rash. "This is a private matter," he snapped. "You cannot be here. You are trespassing on—" "It's Clay's land," I interjected calmly. "He invited no one. You drove onto my property without permission. But they," I gestured towards the news crew, "are situated on the public turnaround area just beyond Cedar Line. Entirely legitimate." Bradley's jaw tightened considerably. The reporter turned to him. "Sir, are you affiliated with the Ridgeview HOA?" "I serve as president," he replied stiffly. "Did your officers attempt to breach Mr. Banner's fence yesterday morning?" "That is a gross misrepresentation." "Because," she interrupted, "we were provided with a video depicting 2 Ridgeview security personnel approaching the boundary, one of whom appeared to make contact with the wire despite visible warning signs. We understand the fence complies with the Texas Agricultural Code." Bradley blinked, visibly perspacing now. "Access to community space must remain uniform." "There is no community space on my land," I stated softly. The reporter shifted her gaze between us, sensing the mounting tension akin to heat radiating from asphalt. "Mr. Bradley, could you elucidate why your HOA believes it possesses jurisdiction over acreage designated by the county as privately deeded to Clay Banner? And can you confirm reports that you approached him with an unsolicited offer to acquire a strip of his northern property last week?" Bradley stammered. He misinterpreted. And at that very moment, that stutter, that crack in his composure, was when the camera zoomed in. I remained silent. It was unnecessary to speak. The news crew surrounded him like a flock of inquisitive hawks, peppering him with follow-up questions, each more pointed than the last. Bradley attempted to speak over them, to wave the folder in the air, to drown in a torrent of excuses faster than he could formulate them. But once a man begins to falter on camera, the process of dissolution is unstoppable. Ultimately, he retreated to his SUV. No triumphant declaration, no further threats, no semblance of dignity. The director inside the van whispered, "Got it." Every second. Before they departed, the reporter turned to me. "Mr. Banner, we may need to follow up. If this situation escalates, the community will expect transparency." I tipped my hat. "Ma'am, I have nothing to conceal." Duke emitted a single bark, as if in agreement. The van drove away, the dust settled, and I understood in that instant that this was no longer simply Clay versus the HOA. This was public. This was pressure. This was the shot heard throughout the entire county. What I did not comprehend, not yet, was that Bradley would not accept his humiliation passively. The following day, he would return with something far more formidable than cameras. He would return with lawyers. The ensuing morning was dedicated to an activity not typically associated with ranch management: constructing a legal arsenal. Not weaponry, not barbed wire, not electrical current. Paperwork. The kind of documentation that can sink entire enterprises. I spread everything across my dining table, the very table my grandfather crafted from salvaged barn timbers back in 1962. The sunlight filtering through the kitchen window illuminated each folder precisely. HOA correspondence, the laminated county map Roberta had printed, photographs of the damaged fence, time-stamped screenshots from my surveillance system, and that striking image of the orange dye splatter from the trespasser who believed himself undetectable. I began categorizing them into distinct piles: ammunition, exhibits, reports, evidence, timeline. Each item possessed significant weight. Each item narrated a story, a narrative the HOA was entirely unprepared to confront. But the final folder held the decisive blow. Within it were 2 crucial components: the audio recording of Bradley's attempt to dismiss the entire matter, and the sketch of the developer's proposed access road, which I had obtained from a cooperative surveyor who harbored no fondness for being misled by corporate executives. That sketch precisely delineated Bradley's motive for desiring the removal of my fence. It wasn't about aesthetics or community harmony. Their objective was to establish a roadway across my property to facilitate a more extensive development project. It was, quite simply, avarice. I gazed at that folder for a considerable duration, the way a soldier surveys a loaded round before inserting it into the chamber. This was no longer about self-preservation. This was a counter-offensive. I picked up the telephone and dialed Daniel Torres. He answered on the second ring, his voice rough like gravel beneath a boot. "Well, damn," he said. "I'm elbow deep in my Mustang's carburetor, and suddenly you call. That usually signifies someone's about to be sued into oblivion." "The HOA's legal counsel paid a visit," I stated. "Delivered a threat package thicker than a church hymnal." Daniel emitted a dry chuckle. "Let me guess. Kellerman. Slicked back hair? Smells like he bathes in filtered city water." "That's him. Typical. Bradley prefers hiring individuals who never perspire." He paused. "All right, Hermano. What's the real issue?" "He's attempting to revive some outdated claim regarding future access corridors, asserting my fence obstructs community expansion." Daniel let out a bark of laughter so loud it seemed to rattle my eardrum. "Oh, heavens, no! They're still employing that antiquated tactic. Clay, I defeated that argument in 09-14, and just last year, these HOA types recycle bad ideas like discount store blenders." "Are you available on Monday?" I inquired. "For you? I'll postpone breakfast and my garage time. My wife will curse me in 2 languages, but she'll manage." "You'll need a substantial briefcase," I advised. "I'm bringing 2. And Clay, listen." His voice lowered. Calm. Deadly calm. The tone he adopted overseas when warning me of an impending sandstorm or mortar attack. "You possess the truth, the incontrovertible facts, and the law on your side. They have ego and PowerPoint presentations. Bullies don't intimidate me, especially those in HOA attire." A sense of resolute certainty settled within my chest. Not comfort, but determination. "See you Monday," I confirmed. "You better." "And Clay?" "Yes." "I'm bringing my lucky boots, the ones I wear when I know someone is about to face defeat." I hung up and glanced back at the table, at the map, the photographs, the folders stacked like formidable defenses. Outside, the wind swept across the pasture, rustling the cedar posts along my fence line, the very same fence line that had become a symbol throughout the town, the demarcation where a rancher finally stood firm against an HOA that had overstepped its bounds. Monday was approaching, and with Daniel Torres standing beside me in that courthouse, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. They were utterly unprepared for the battle they had initiated. Daniel Torres arrived shortly after dawn, his dusty Silverado rumbling into my driveway, the same truck he had driven since our military service. I heard the engine before I saw him, that familiar low growl of a V8 that sounded like a weary bull awakening. He stepped out, his boots crunching on the gravel with the deliberate weight of a man prepared for combat. His hair was slightly longer than I recalled, but his eyes remained as sharp as a fence staple. "Morning, Hermano," he greeted, holding up a thermos. "Brought coffee potent enough to strip paint off a tractor." "You'll need it," I replied. "I've prepared the battlefield inside." We entered the house, proceeding directly to the dining table, which was completely covered with folders, printed maps, photographic stills, screenshots, and the laminated county map Roberta had proudly declared irrefutable. Daniel paused midway to the table and let out a whistle. "Well, I'll be damned," he remarked. "Clay, this isn't evidence. This is artillery." He began sifting through the piles, his movements careful and methodical, just as he used to meticulously check radio frequencies before overseas patrols. HOA letters, photographs, timestamps, evidence of fence damage, footage of the trespass. He tapped one folder with his finger. "You even printed the orange dye shot. Excellent. Judges appreciate visual impact." Then he stopped abruptly, his gaze fixed on the folder I'd set aside, the one containing the audio recording and the access road sketch. "What is this?" he inquired. "Open it," I instructed. He complied, and for a fleeting moment he appeared to stop breathing. "Where in the hell did you obtain this?" he whispered. "A surveyor contact. He disliked being misled by HOA board members." Daniel leaned back in his chair, his jaw set as if he had just discovered a concealed ace at the bottom of a deck. "This isn't merely a fence dispute," he stated, tapping the sketch forcefully. "They are pursuing an access route, a feeder lane, likely leading to a larger development or a golf resort contract." "Precisely. And they attempted to sever your wire and intimidate you into a quiet sale of the property. A classic maneuver." He shook his head. "But that audio, Clay, that is the definitive blow." He looked at me, his eyes reflecting a mixture of respect and disbelief. "Do you comprehend what you have constructed here?" "A fence?" I queried. "No," he replied. "A case, a genuine one." "Hell, Clay, half the attorneys I know don't prepare this thoroughly. If you weren't a rancher, you'd make an exceptional investigator." I shrugged. "The land teaches you to be observant." He grinned. "And the military taught you to meticulously document everything. We spent the next 2 hours engaged in an activity that felt equally like legal strategy and planning a military assault." Daniel organized the evidence piles into 3 distinct categories: defense, offense, and fatal blows. "That audio is a fatal blow," he declared. "This sketch," he held it up as a sheriff might display confiscated contraband, "is also a fatal blow. And the video of their operative cutting your wire, that goes into the offense category. Strong offense." He retrieved his laptop, a battered old machine adorned with stickers from past cases and a faded Marine Corps decal. "All right," he said, cracking his knuckles. "Let's draft your counterclaim." He began typing, muttering under his breath as he composed. "Trespassing, willful property destruction, attempted coercion, unsubstantiated legal threat, misuse of HOA authority." Then he paused. "You see," he explained, "we aren't merely requesting the court to discard their claim. No, we intend to pursue financial reparations." "How substantial?" He met my gaze with that familiar smirk, a look I recognized from countless sandstorms and an overabundance of tavern brawls. "I'm contemplating a sum with 6 digits. I raised an eyebrow. 6 digits for a skirmish over a boundary, for their transgressions, for their malicious intent. He leaned in. "Clay, they breached your perimeter. They issued threats. They engaged in deceit. They attempted to coerce a buyout, disregarding established property lines." He gestured towards the diagram. "This constitutes deliberate encroachment fraud. I've initiated legal action for less and emerged with nearly $200,000. I reclined in my chair, feeling the aged timbers groan beneath me. "So, what figure are we targeting?" Daniel finalized his typing and angled the laptop towards me. 135,000 sounds equitable?" he inquired. I studied the sum. It wasn't about the monetary value. It was about the principle. It was about the soil my grandfather bequeathed to me, the soil I had shed blood upon, toiled on, and steadfastly refused to relinquish. "Yes," I affirmed. "That's fair." Daniel closed the laptop with a decisive click, as if finalizing a judgment. "We'll submit these filings tomorrow morning," he stated. "And Clay, indeed, once this arrives in their digital mail, they'll be in a frenzy. They'll attempt some rash maneuver. It's their usual modus operandi." I nodded. "Let them try." He offered a slow, menacing smile. "That's precisely why I donned my fortunate footwear." The Travis County Courthouse emanated that characteristic aroma: citrus-scented floor polish, aged parchment, and air so parched it seemed to possess its own opinions. It had been years since my last visit. On that occasion, I was providing testimony for a neighbor whose livestock had been pilfered. This time, I wasn't a witness. I was, technically speaking, the accused. Daniel and I entered through the double doors, much like combatants stepping onto a meticulously scouted battlefield. We weren't apprehensive, merely prepared. The chamber was abuzz with attendees. Residents of Clear Hillikers occupied the initial 2 rows, postures rigid, their hushed tones resembling the flutter of a disturbed henhouse. Their security detail supervisor, the identical individual who had once embraced my electrified fencing as if it were an old comrade, occupied a front seat position, clad in his uniform, chin tucked, projecting an air of anticipation for commendation. On our side, a modest contingent of ranchers, individuals I didn't recognize. They offered acknowledging nods, the unspoken camaraderie of country folk when one of their own is drawn into an unprovoked conflict. Judge Evelyn Hart entered, a diminutive figure with piercing eyes and an aura that could silence a herd of cattle. The room fell into a profound silence. Clear Hilliker's Homeowners Association versus Mr. Clayton Banner. She announced the HOA's legal representative. Kellerman, his hair immaculately coiffed, his cologne potent enough to incapacitate a mule, rose first. Your Honor, we are present today due to Mr. Banner's construction of a hazardous electrified barrier which contravenes community safety regulations and poses a significant risk. Daniel stood, his movement as smooth as a sunrise. Your Honor, if I may, we respectfully request to present our evidence in a structured sequence to facilitate clarity. The judge inclined her head. Proceed. Daniel reached for the laminated county parcel map, the very document Roberta had proudly presented and preserved as if it were a museum artifact. He positioned it on the display. This is the official county survey, he stated. It delineates Mr. Banner's property boundary with distinct clarity. It also indicates the HOA's jurisdictional limit, which terminates 43 feet south of his fence. The judge's gaze sharpened. Therefore, the HOA lacks any legal authority over his property. Precisely, Your Honor. Kellerman attempted to rise, but the judge preempted him with a subtle elevation of her hand. Do you dispute the accuracy of the county's official records? He swallowed audibly. We believe there might be. No discrepancies are present here. Her voice snapped like a bullwhip. The map is unambiguous. A soft ripple of murmurs swept through the assembly. The groundwork was established. Daniel activated a remote control. The illumination in the room subtly dimmed. He initiated playback of the night vision footage capturing the HOA patrolman. The very officer, now seated in the front row, stealthily approaching my fence, bolt cutters in hand, severing the uppermost wire before squeezing through, much like a determined opossum on a mission. When the segment depicting his prior electrocution commenced, the same officer sank so low in his seat he nearly vanished beneath the dais. A suppressed snort emanated from someone behind me, an unsuccessful attempt to stifle laughter. Daniel allowed the silence to linger, its weight palpable. This, he declared calmly, is neither an inspection nor a compliance verification. This constitutes trespassing and the destruction of property. The judge's steady gaze was fixed upon the security officer who appeared on the verge of melting. Mr. Kellerman, she inquired, is that individual employed by your client? He shifted uncomfortably. Yes, Your Honor. The situation only worsened for him. Daniel retrieved his mobile device, connected it to the sound system, and pressed play. Bradley's voice resonated throughout the chamber. We can resolve this entire matter. A developer could acquire the northern parcel. You depart with greater wealth. We maintain tranquility. Then, my voice. Are you attempting to purchase my property? Bradley responded. Merely presenting options. No legal proceedings. No complications. A woman in the HOA section emitted a startled gasp. Another whispered, Bradley, what have you done? Judge Hart leaned forward. Mr. Sloan, were you attempting to negotiate a land acquisition while simultaneously preparing to litigate against the property owner? Bradley opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. The judge's expression suggested she wished to strike him with the very gavel. Daniel had not yet concluded. He retrieved the final document, the one procured from the surveyor acquaintance, and opened it with the meticulous care of someone unveiling a sarcophagus. This, he announced, projecting the developer's blueprint onto the screen, represents the true underlying objective. The courtroom leaned in. The blueprint was rudimentary yet damning. A service road bisecting my northern pasture, leading directly to a planned expansion zone. Daniel then directed attention to the lower corner. Your Honor, Kindly note the date imprinted on this blueprint. March 12th. He paused. That date precedes Mr. Banner's receipt of his initial violation notice by 2 months. A collective wave of comprehension washed over the room. They hadn't discovered a violation. Daniel articulated that they had fabricated one to facilitate this expansion. Judge Hart scrutinized the blueprint as if it had personally affronted her maternal lineage. She slowly removed her spectacles, folded them, and placed them down. That, she stated, is a calculated abuse of authority. She then fixed her gaze directly upon Bradley. In Texas, Mr. Sloan, we do not resort to land theft through documentation any more than we do through physical barriers. You are fortunate that Mr. Banner employed only electricity. A few ranchers behind me offered murmurs of assent. One even uttered a soft "Amen." The courtroom held its collective breath as Judge Hart prepared to deliver her verdict. Mr. Banner, she declared, your fence is entirely compliant with the Texas Farm and Ranch Land Protection Act. Your property falls outside the HOA's jurisdiction. You are awarded $135,000 in damages, inclusive of legal expenditures, repair costs, and compensation for emotional distress. Bradley closed his eyes as if struck by a blunt object. As for the Clear Hillikers HOA, the judge continued, you are hereby mandated to issue a formal public retraction and are permanently prohibited from undertaking any further regulatory actions concerning Mr. Banner's property. She paused, allowing her subsequent pronouncement to resonate. And Mr. Sloan, your conduct will be forwarded to the district attorney for review. A profound silence descended upon the entire courtroom. Daniel leaned towards me, his voice barely above a whisper. I told you the boots would work. I nearly smiled. Nearly. The dust from the courthouse had barely settled when Daniel and I emerged back into the open air. The sky stretched vast and boundless, that characteristic bold Texas azure that instills a sense of cosmic scale. A breeze stirred, warm and consistent, carrying the subtle fragrance of cedar and distant hay. Daniel placed a hand on my shoulder. You handled yourself admirably, Hermano. As did you, I replied. He grinned. Didn't I tell you the boots would work? I shook my head, but a faint smile began to form. We bid each other farewell. Daniel entered his Silverado and drove away. He didn't look back. Such men depart with the assurance of work well done. I returned home, the roadway unfurling beneath my tires in its customary fashion, like a living recollection. The ranch, however, felt altered as I pulled into the drive. Not larger, not more imposing, simply more steadfast, as if it had firmly planted its roots, declaring, "This land endures." Upon reaching the porch, my aged dog, Duke, raised his head, his tail giving a single, dignified thud, as if to feign indifference to my absence. I stroked his ears and settled into my rocking chair. The sun was already descending towards the horizon, bathing everything in that warm, orange luminescence unique to Texas. For the first time in months, I exhaled with a sense of ease. The repercussions were swift. By the following morning, my email inbox resembled a ruptured seed bag, overflowing with messages. Some conveyed congratulations. Others offered thanks. A few expressed unadulterated indignation towards the HOA, typed in capital letters as if an irate uncle were forcefully operating the keyboard. However, the most significant messages originated from individuals I had never encountered. A rancher from Llano County wrote, "Clay, they're attempting the same ploy here. Your case offers us encouragement." A woman from the vicinity of Waco stated, "Thank you for standing your ground. My parents lost acreage to a developer in '98. I wish they'd had someone like you back then." And then, one simple, direct message arrived from a young rancher in a neighboring county, Harold Kim. "Mr. Banner, I believe I require assistance." I contacted him. It transpired that Harold's predicament bore a striking resemblance to my own prior to the escalation. A new development encroaching, an HOA extending its influence, issuing formal warnings, creating boundary ambiguities, and employing subtle intimidation tactics. Consequently, I extended an invitation for him to visit. He arrived that Saturday. A lean young man, perhaps 26 years of age, his hat too large, his boots too new. Yet his hands bore the unmistakable mark of someone who worked the land, calloused and ingrained with dirt. We strolled towards the northern pasture as the evening sun draped its golden mantle across the landscape. Duke ambled alongside us, as if overseeing the excursion. Harold examined the fence line, the cedar posts firmly embedded, the reflective electric warning signs glinting in the fading light. He absorbed it all without uttering a word. Finally he inquired, "Were you apprehensive when they initially targeted you?" I considered it briefly. "No," I replied, "but I didn't appreciate it." "Why not?" "Because it wasn't a fair contest. They possessed documentation, held meetings, formed committees, and individuals who had never touched soil dictated the fate of my property. That's the aspect that chafes." He nodded slowly. "So, what course of action did you take?" I tapped the fence post. "This. I established a boundary they could not surmount, ethically or legally. I didn't initiate hostility, son, but I didn't permit it to overwhelm me either." He swallowed with some effort. "I aspire to emulate your example." "You will," I assured him, "but you won't be alone in this endeavor." That evening, Harold joined us for supper. Cornbread, smoked brisket, pinto beans, the customary fare. He spoke of his father, who had passed the ranch down to him. He described how the property, though modest in size, was unequivocally theirs. He expressed his determination to preserve it from those who viewed it as a mere buffer zone for future amenities. After his departure, I returned to the porch, gazing out across the pasture, illuminated in a silvery hue by the moonlight. It was then that the concept began to crystallize. Not abruptly or dramatically, but with a quiet, persistent resolve, much like fence wire being drawn taut. A collective, a consortium of landowners sharing maps, evidence, counsel, and mutual support, not to actively confront HOAs, but to preemptively address those that overstepped their legitimate authority. Daniel embraced the idea enthusiastically. He developed a suite of standardized documents, including cease and desist notices, boundary affirmations, and trespass warnings, all meticulously crafted and legally sound. "Pro bono," he declared, "for the collective good." Denise from Channel 5 was equally receptive. She produced a comprehensive segment titled "The Fence Line Network: When Neighbors Defend Their Land." I had never anticipated a local journalist would portray me as some kind of rural champion, yet that's precisely what she did. Within a month, 4 additional ranchers had joined our initiative. An elderly couple engaged in a dispute over a beautification buffer zone order, a goat farmer who discovered HOA volunteers encroaching upon his property without authorization, and a Vietnam veteran fatigued by intrusive drone surveillance over his barn. We convened weekly, sometimes at my location, other times at different venues, sharing coffee, recounting experiences, and distributing maps as if they were strategic battle plans. Gradually, a transformation occurred, not within the land itself, nor within the legal framework, but in the collective self-perception of individuals, fostering a sense of shared purpose and enhanced resilience. We christened it the Fence Line Network, and the designation resonated. As for the Clear Hillikers entity, they dissolved with the structural integrity of sodden cardboard. The apology they attempted to post at 2 o'clock in the morning failed to appease anyone, least of all Denise. She broadcast a follow-up report questioning why an HOA with nothing to conceal would publish its retraction under the cover of night while the rest of the state slept. Bradley Sloan resigned his position before any formal vote could initiate his removal. Rumor had it that no developer in Austin would engage his services again. There was talk of him being the individual who was defeated by a rancher wielding an electrically charged fence powered by solar energy. Such a reputation is not easily shed. Approximately 6 weeks subsequent to the legal proceedings, I was patrolling my fence line at dawn, on a morning so crisp and cold it invigorated the lungs with each inhalation, when I observed a man, accompanied by his young son, standing near the boundary. The boy, no more than 6 years of age, a juice box in hand, his eyes wide with apparent awe, as if encountering a legendary figure. "Daddy," he whispered, "is this the electric cowboy fence?" His father chuckled, a touch of embarrassment evident. "Yes, son, this is it." I approached, tipping my hat. "Rest assured," I assured him, "it's currently deactivated." The boy squinted upwards at me. "Sir, did you truly administer a shock to an entire neighborhood?" I let out a chuckle. "No, son. I merely reminded them of their perimeter." The boy regarded me as if I had imparted a universal secret. His father nodded respectfully. "We appreciate your actions. The local community needed to witness someone stand their ground." We exchanged handshakes. They departed, the boy still animatedly discussing electricity, cowboys, and fences that had captured media attention. I remained there for a moment longer, observing the sunrise ascend over the hills, illuminating the acreage my grandfather had bequeathed to me, the land I had defended, the land that would remain banner property for generations to come. The fence emitted a faint hum on the morning breeze, steady as a pulse. It was no longer merely wire and electrical current. It was a commitment, a boundary etched into the Texas soil, and a clear indication to any who might forget that certain lands are not for sale, not for appropriation, and certainly not for an HOA to claim. Not now, not ever.